Hey guys, this is Hemant from Edureka. Today in this session, we'll be talking about Amazon AWS. So without wasting any more time, let's move on to today's agenda. So we'll start off with what is AWS and then we'll be discussing the different domains which are there in AWS. So domains are basically the categories under which AWS offers its services. Once we learn all these services, we'll try to solve a real life problem using these services and the domains that we have just learned. After that, wouldn't it be cool if you could use all these services for free? Or if you could practice this use case for free? Yes, you heard it right. I will teach you guys how to do that by making you guys learn the AWS Free Tier. After that, we'll start off with AWS certifications. So we'll be discussing all the certifications which are offered by AWS. And then we'll start off with AWS Solution Architect role, the role that you guys have taken this training for, right? In the end, we'll talk about the AWS competitors, we'll talk about all the major players which are out there in the cloud computing market, and we'll see why AWS is still a leader among them. So guys, this is our agenda for today. Are we clear with it? All right, John says yes, Dhruv says yes, Theon says yes. All right, guys, so let's move ahead. Let's start off with what is AWS now. So AWS is a cloud services provider from Amazon. So it's a platform on which AWS offers its cloud services. Now these cloud services can be mixed and matched to create any kind of application. Now this application can vary from a healthcare application to a social media application to a banking application. You can create any kind of application in the AWS infrastructure, but you would use the same services for it, right? And that is the reason these services are actually called the building blocks for AWS. So guys, this is what AWS deals in. Do you have any questions related to what AWS has to offer us or what AWS deals in? So since now we understand what is AWS, let's move on and discuss the different domains under which AWS offers its services. So these are the different domains that are there in AWS. So first up, we have the compute domain. So the compute domain would include services like EC2. So an EC2 is just like a raw server. It's a fresh computer that can be configured to be anything. You can install any software in it. You can configure the firewall to any setting and it can perform as you require, right? So you can configure it to be a web server. You can configure it to be a worker tier environment. You can configure the EC2 server to be anything. Right. Next up, we have the migration domain. So migration domain basically helps you in migrating your data from your own data center to the AWS infrastructure. Now there's a service in the migration domain which is called Snowball. So Snowball helps you transfer your data from your own data center to the AWS infrastructure when you have a large amount of data. So suppose your data center is at a scale of petabytes, right? So it doesn't make sense for you to transfer this much amount of data on the internet, right? Because it will eat up your bandwidth. So that is where Snowball comes in and that is where you will use Snowball. Next up, we have the security and identity compliance. So security and identity compliance basically includes services like IAM, which helps you authenticate people to your AWS account. So if you have a company and you want to give usage restrictions on the employees that are using your AWS account, you can do that using IAM. Next up, we have the storage domain. So storage domain would basically include services like S3, which is a file system. So a file system is basically used to store executable files which can be used on your website or somewhere else. Right. Next up, we have the networking and content delivery. So networking domain would basically include services like Route 53. So Route 53 is a domain name system. It converts your domain name to a public IP address. So it performs just exactly like a domain name system. And you can also use Route 53 for external resources as well. It's not important or it's not essential for you to use the AWS resources. You can actually point it to different servers as well. Next up, we have the messaging domain. So messaging domain would include services like SES. So SES is a simple email service which can be used to send bulk emails to your customer base. To do that manually, it will take a lot of time, but with SES, you can do that with a click of a button. Next up, we have the database domain. So database domain would include services like RDS. So RDS is a relational database management service. So it basically manages databases for you. So when I say manage, it can update your database engine. It can update your security fixes. All the tasks that were done manually before can now be done automatically using this management service. Then comes the management tools domain, which would include services like CloudWatch, which is an all-in-one cloud monitoring tool which you can use to monitor your AWS resources, right? So guys, these are basically the domains in which AWS offers its services. And these are the functionalities. So with this, you get the idea of the functionalities that you can incorporate in your application if you're building it using the AWS resources. So guys, are we clear with this slide? Are we clear with all the domains? All right, people are saying yes. Dhruv says yes. John says all clear. All right, guys, let's move ahead. Let's solve the problem now. Enough of theory. So we have discussed all the domains in AWS. So we basically know what all AWS deals in, or what all AWS services can handle, right? So if we have a use case like this, we have to create an e-commerce website just like Amazon. So what all domains would we require, right? So let's discuss that. Let's give it a thought. So first of all, we would need a lot of servers because obviously we'll be hosting a website on something, right? So we will need the compute domain. Next up, we will also need a file system where we can store our images for our products, and also maybe MP3 files or video files if there is a download option as well, right? So we would need a file system. Next up, we will need a database as well because we would need to store our users' passwords and emails for their logins and also save their preferences, right? So all of that can be stored in a database. So we would need the database domain as well. Then we would need a domain name, right? So our domain name should point to our server. So we would need a networking domain in between which could convert a domain name to the IP address of the server on which our website is hosted, right? So these are all the domains that we'd be needing. Let's try and represent it using a diagram. So we would be needing a compute domain, we would be needing storage, we would be needing database, we'd be needing networking. So yes, this is it guys. So this is basically the architecture, or this is the way your website will function using these resources, right? So any doubt guys, anything that you want to add in these domains? So guys, if you are clear, let's take 2 seconds more on this slide. Now, if you were to make this architecture using the cloud services, you have AWS at your disposal. But let's also give it a thought. If cloud computing was not there, you would have bought everything yourself on your own money, and you would have made this architecture. Now, this would have led to problem. Let's see what all problems you would have faced. So first of all, this setup would be very expensive. Why? Because guys, you'll be buying a lot of servers, and guys, servers are not cheap. They are very expensive. This setup is obviously going to be very expensive for you if you buy all the servers. Second of all, let's address the problem of scalability. So scalability basically means growing up the number of servers or coming down from a minimum number of servers. Now you cannot judge the kind of traffic which is going to come on your website, right? Now, if you become over ambitious and you buy a lot of servers, it will lead to for their idle time, because you buy a lot of servers, but they'll not be utilized properly because that kind of traffic is not coming onto your website for now. And if you become less ambitious and you buy less servers and more traffic comes onto your website, it becomes a bad experience for your customer, which is again bad for business, right? So what to do? So this was a problem. Third of all, you had to monitor and maintain your servers. Since you're buying the servers on your own, you would have to hire a team to monitor your servers continuously, because obviously you don't want your website to face any kind of downtime. And if and when you encounter a problem, troubleshooting this problem will obviously involve more money. You can solve it on your own, or your hired team will do that, right? In any case, you will incur more cost, and hence it will become more expensive for you. So guys, these were the problems, and hence we use cloud computing today and save costs on everything, right? So guys, are we clear with the problems that were there before cloud computing? All right, Dhruv says yes, John says all clear, Theon says all clear, Parvati says yes. All right guys, so let's move ahead. Now, since these are the problems, people didn't want to buy their servers on their own, right? They wanted cloud providers. Now, if you were using a cloud provider, say like AWS, let's see how you will architect this problem. So in the networking domain, like I said, there's a service called Route 53, which is a domain name system. So we'd be using Route 53 for that. In place of storage, we'd be using S3 because S3 is a file system offered by AWS. Now in terms of database, we'll be using RDS because we'll be storing the user's information, the login ID, the password, and the product information, which can all be represented in the form of a table. It is structured, and hence we'll be using a relational database for that, right? Next up, we have the compute domain. So the compute domain would include services like EC2, which will host your website onto it. And then since your website should also be scalable, right? So let's address the three problems which we just discussed. So our setup was expensive, our setup was very difficult to scale, and we had to monitor and maintain our servers, right? So first of all, the expense part, so you pay as you go. So whatever you use on Amazon or whatever you use on AWS, whatever services you're using on AWS, you pay them according to your usage. So if you're using a server for say 2 hours, you just pay for those 2 hours. You don't pay for the whole month, right? So, and obviously if you're not buying servers, the investment costs come down drastically, right? This setup is no more expensive. It comes well within your budget. Next up, there was the problem of scalability. So under the compute domain, we have elastic load balancer and auto scaling. Let's discuss a bit about these services. So auto scaling automatically scales up and down your number of servers according to the metrics that you have set. Now what are these metrics? These metrics could be something like this. Say suppose you have 3 servers running, and when you say then the combined capacity of them, the combined CPU usage of these 3 servers goes beyond 80%, launch a new server or spin up a new server. So this is done by auto scaling. Again, same in the case when the CPU usage goes below 10%, maybe decommission a server. So this is again done by auto scaling. But when you're using auto scaling, you always use the elastic load balancer as well. Why? Because what elastic load balancer does is it distributes your workload equally among the number of servers which are running. So if auto scaling runs or auto scaling spins up a new server, the traffic has to be distributed among the servers that were already there plus one the new server, right? So this is managed by the elastic load balancer. So coming back to my point, we were talking about scalability. So the elastic load balancer and auto scaling solves that problem. So it addresses the problem of scalability, it addresses this infrastructure or this setup also addresses the problem of expense. Let's talk about the monitor and maintenance part. So all the monitoring and all the maintenance of the servers are handled on the part of AWS. You don't have to worry about anything. You just have to work on your application and that is it. Everything else will be managed by AWS. Now this is the beauty of cloud computing, guys. You are getting a lot of benefits and at the same time it is not hurting your pocket as well. These are basically all the services that you would be using in your architecture. Now let's fit these services in this diagram that we saw before and let's see how it will look. So our website URL will point to Route 53, which will convert that domain name to an IP address. That IP address will be hosting your website, and attached to that server will be elastic load balancer and auto scaling, which will address your problem of scalability. Now your server will interact with the database for the user's information and the product information, and the product's images and the other executable files are stored in the file system. So this is how your architecture will look. So guys, do you have any questions related to the use case that we just discussed or any questions so far? Anything that you didn't understand? Alright, Dhruv says no question. John says all clear. Guys, any part that you don't understand, please throw up a question. I'll be happy to answer your query. Okay guys, since you guys have no questions, let's move along. But before that, let's give it a recap. So you've learned all these services, right? You know all about these services now, but the question is, how will you use all these services or how will you learn more about these services? Because theory is one part, but until and unless you don't use them actually, that is by practical, you won't know any one of them, right? So how will you learn all of these services? So we have come up with this learning path in which for learning AWS, you first have to opt for AWS training. So congratulations on the first part for opting this training class. So your first part is done. Now this training class would include 2 sections. First are the training sessions. This session that is happening is your training session. And the next part is yours, which is the hands-on part. So whatever practicals that we are doing today, whatever practicals that we are going to do today are to be practiced by you guys because that practical session is very important, right? Now how will you do that practical session? So I will teach you guys how to create an AWS account, right? But creation of an AWS account, but then you will ask me, Hemant, we are creating an AWS account, we have paid you, why should we pay for using the AWS services as well, right? So we have a good news over there for you guys. So AWS understands that without using these services, you won't be able to decide whether you should go for AWS or some other cloud provider for that matter. So for the first year, from the date that you have signed up on AWS, you get the free tier option. And this free tier option is valid for 1 year from the time you have signed up, right? So you can practice all you want in this free tier. We'll talk more about free tier in the next slide, but before that, do you guys have any question related to the training or related to the points that I've just discussed with you? So Dhruv has a question, won't all people keep using free tier? Very good question, Dhruv, but like I said, it is only valid for 1 year and it has its limitations. If you're using it for business, you cannot use the free tier for business. Why? Because the free tier includes all the services at their minimum. In the sense, like if you're using the compute domain, right? So there's a service called T2.micro, or in EC2, there's an instance called T2.micro. Now you can imagine T2.micro as a core-to-duo processor in the AWS cloud world. In the technology that exists today, when we have i3, we have i5, if you want to use core-to-duo for your business purpose, it doesn't make sense. But that core-to-duo would help you if you want to learn about it, if you learn about how AWS functions, right? And that is the purpose of free tier, to help you learn. So does that answer your question, Dhruv? All right, anyone, any other queries, guys? All right, John is asking me, we can create a new ID every year. Yes, John, you can do that, but your aim is to become a AWS Solution Architect, right? You don't want to practice AWS every year. You'd be learning AWS maybe in the next 3 months and then you can become a Solution Architect. So why go to the trouble of creating a new ID, right? Any more questions, guys? All right, since no questions, let's jump on to our next section, which is the free tier. All right, guys, let's now discuss the AWS free tier. This is the free tier. So free tier is of two types, guys. First up is the non-expiring free tier, and the next is the introductory free tier. So what is the difference? The non-expiring free tier never expires. Like I told you guys, the free tier is valid for 1 year from the time you have signed up. But that does not apply to the non-expiring free tier. It only applies to the introductory free tier, right? So the non-expiring free tier includes services like SES, it includes services like Lambda, DynamoDB, CloudWatch. We'll talk briefly about these services in a little while. Let's talk about the introductory feature services as well. We have RDS, we have EC2, S3, and CloudFront. So let's talk about the non-expiring feature first. So we have a service called SES, which is simple email service, which I told you guys is used to send bulk emails to your customers. So you have a non-expiring feature in SES, which I'll give you the details in the next slide. Next up, we have the Lambda service. So the Lambda service is basically a serverless compute service. So it is not used to host an application unlike EC2. It is just used to run background tasks. So what are background tasks? So if you have an application, if you have image processing application and you're uploading an image to your server, and once the image gets uploaded, maybe you have to compress that image, you have to apply filters to it. So all these tasks are background tasks. It happens on the server side, right? So all of these tasks can be executed by Lambda, but this is what Lambda is all about. It cannot host your application. It can only do the background tasks. Next up, we have DynamoDB. So DynamoDB is a non-relational database management service. So it's a management service which manages NoSQL databases for you, right? So it is just like RDS. So it does the same tasks as RDS, but the difference is it manages the NoSQL database. Next up, we have CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is an all-in-one cloud monitoring tool. So we discussed in the domains how CloudWatch can be used. So yeah, that is all about it. In the introductory feature, we have RDS. So RDS is a relational database management service. Like I said, it is used to manage your relational databases, and it is there in the introductory feature. Next up, we have EC2. So EC2 is a compute service offered by AWS, which is just like a raw server, and it is there in the introductory feature as well. Then we have S3. So S3 is a file system which is offered by AWS, and file systems are basically used to store your executable files. So that is in the introductory feature as well. So whatever free tier options that we are going to discuss in the next slide is going to be valid for 1 year from the time you have signed up. Then we have the CloudFront service. So CloudFront service is caching service. So what is a caching service basically? So if you're accessing a website which is say in US and you are sitting here in India, and you want to access that website will be cached to a location in India so that it becomes nearer to you, and hence the latency becomes lesser. So this is what caching service is all about, and that is what CloudFront is. So guys, any questions related to what a non-expiring free tier is and what an introductory free tier is, and any question about the services that we have just discussed? Alright, so Dhruv is asking me what is NoSQL. Alright Dhruv, so let's talk about MySQL first. So MySQL is a relational database system, right? All data that you store on MySQL is structured. So when I say structured, it can be represented in the form of a table, it can be represented in the form of a structure, right? Let's talk about your Facebook page, right? So if you were to copy everything from your wall and paste it somewhere, right, you cannot make sense out of it, right? When you can't make sense out of some data, it is called unstructured data. All right, and this unstructured data can be stored in a non-relational database, which is NoSQL. So if you have SQL for relational database, it's a MySQL. If you have SQL for unstructured data, that is NoSQL. So Dhruv, does that answer your question? All right, guys, any more questions? All right, John says no questions. Others? Theon says all well. Parvati says all clear. All right, guys, if no questions, let's move ahead. So let's talk about the introductory free tier first. So all these services are free for the first year since you have signed up, right? And these are the things which are free in this service. So let's talk about AWS EC2 first. So it offers 750 hours of free Windows or Linux T2.micro instance usage, right? EC2 offers you 750 hours every month. So basically if you are running one instance, you can run it for 750 hours. But that does not mean you can run one more instance, that is two instances for 750 hours each. It means you can run 750 hours in total. So if you're running two instances, the time gets halved. So you can run it for 375 hours each, right? So this is what AWS EC2 free tier offers you. And this free tier as well, you can only launch the T2.micro instance type. If you cannot launch any more processor or any more computing power, you can only launch the T2.micro computing power. So the next service is AWS RDS. Now in AWS RDS you have 750 hours of free db.t2.micro instance usage. So like in case of EC2, in the case of RDS as well, if there's only one instance, you can use it for 750 hours, but if you use more than one instances, the time gets divided like that. Next up, you can use 20 GB of DB storage. So that means you can use up to 20 GB of storage free for the first year. And where can you use the storage? You can use it in either SSD or magnetic. Now what is SSD and magnetic? SSD is basically solid state drive and magnetic is again a kind of storage. So the difference between these two storage devices is that in SSD you get high IOs, you get high input outputs and hence higher data transfer. But in the case of magnetic, the data transfer is lower. So either ways, you get 20 GB of free storage for the first 1 year. Next up, you get 20 GB of backups free as well. So on the magnetic storage, you get 20 GB of backups. So obviously, if you're using databases, you're taking backups, right? So the first 20 GBs that you'll be using, you can use it for free for the first year. Next up, you also have 10 million IOs free in AWS RDS. So for the first year, you get 10 million IOs free. So guys, any questions related to AWS EC2 and AWS RDS in terms of the free tier that it offers? All right, Theon says no questions. Others? Dhruv says all clear. John says no questions. All right, guys, so let's move ahead. Let's come on to our third service, which is AWS S3. So AWS S3 offers you 5 GB of standard storage on S3. So it means you can save up to 5 GB on S3 for the first 1 year for free. All right. You also get 20,000 GET requests and 2,000 PUT requests. So basically GET requests are those when you are accessing a file from S3, right? Maybe you're downloading a file from S3. So this downloading is one request and it's one GET request, right? So you can make 20,000 of those free, and also you can make 2,000 PUT requests, which are nothing but the uploading requests that you can make. So AWS S3 offers you 2,000 PUT requests as well. Next up, you have CloudFront. So CloudFront, like I told you guys, it's a caching service. So in CloudFront, in the form of free tier, you get 50 GB data transfer out, right? So 50 GB of data transfer out in CloudFront is free for the first 1 year. And then you have 2 million HTTP and HTTPS requests of CloudFront. So you can make 2 million requests for free in the first year, right? So guys, any questions between AWS S3 and CloudFront in terms of free tier? All right, Theon says all clear. Dhruv says no questions. Parvati says all is well. All right, guys. This brings us to the end of the introductory free tier. Let's move on to the non-expiring free tier now. So the non-expiring free tier includes all these services. So the first service is the Lambda service. So with Lambda, you get 1 million free requests per month, right? So this is a non-expiring free tier. So every month till the time you're using the AWS, you get 1 million free requests. Next up, you also get 3.2 million seconds of computing time per month. Now what is computing time? Now like I told you, Lambda is used to execute your background task, right? Now whatever time each task is taking, all that time is computed and aggregated, and if it falls between 3.2 million seconds, these seconds are free for you, right? Interesting, right? So this is the free tier that is offered by Lambda. Next up we have SES, which is simple email service. So in simple email service, you get 62,000 outbound messages per month to any recipient when you call Amazon SES. So you can send 62,000 messages per month for free. Also, you can process or receive 1,000 inbound messages for free for every month, right? So this is non-expiring. So every month you can send around 62,000 messages and you can receive 1,000 messages for free. Next up, we have DynamoDB. All right, before that, any question guys between Lambda and SES? So Dhruv is asking me, do people who don't use free tier get free tier automatically? Dhruv, any new customer which signs up on AWS has free tier activated on their account. So like I told you, like in the case of EC2, if you're using the t2.micro instance, you'll get the free tier. If you're using some other instance, you'll not get the free tier. So you have to be very careful when you're launching instances. Don't worry, we'll be launching instances in a while, and I'll show you guys how you have to be careful when you're selecting instances or which instances to launch in terms of free tier. All right, any other question, Dhruv, or any other question, guys, that you want to ask before I move further? All right, so let's move along. Next up, we have DynamoDB. DynamoDB again falls under the non-expiring free tier, and under the non-expiring free tier, you get the first 25 GB of storage for free, and you get 25 units of read capacity and 25 units of write capacity for free. Now, what is 25 units of read capacity and 25 units of write capacity? When there's a request made on DynamoDB, and say suppose you're reading from DynamoDB, and the number of requests which comes in, as the number of requests rises, the units rises. Say suppose there are 1,000 requests right now to DynamoDB and you're using say around 2 units of read capacity. As the request rises, the read capacity units also rises. Same is the case with the write as well. So you can use 25 units of write capacity and 25 units of read capacity for free in DynamoDB. All right. Let's move on to our next service, which is CloudWatch. So CloudWatch is basically a cloud monitoring tool, like I told you guys. So with CloudWatch, you get 10 Amazon CloudWatch custom metrics and 1 million API requests for free. So it's a non-expiring free tier. So these things are for free for the whole of the lifetime. Next up, you have 5 GB of log data ingestion, which means it can process up to 5 GB of log data for free, and it can also archive your log data up to 5 GB for free. Then you have 3 dashboards with up to 50 metrics each per month. So you can configure up to 50 metrics in 3 dashboards each per month. All right, so this is a non-expiring free tier, guys. So you have this kind of facility for every month in CloudWatch. So guys, any questions related to the services that we just discussed in the non-expiring free tier? All right, so Theon has a question. What is a unit in DynamoDB? All right, Theon, I'll explain you again. Like I said, you have 25 units of read capacity and 25 units of write capacity. Let's talk about read capacity. You'll understand what write capacity is. So when a request is made to DynamoDB, say around 10 requests are made to DynamoDB. So for read, right? So you're reading data from the database. Now these 10 requests will account to say a unit. So it gives an overhead to the database, right? Because you're processing requests from people. So when you're processing, you get overhead. So every 10 requests that you get on DynamoDB, say account to 1 unit. Now let's talk about 10 units. So 10 units would be like 100 requests, right? 20 units would be like 200 requests, and 25 units would be like 250 requests, right? So in a way, so this is just an example to make you understand, Theon, but that in a way you can make 250 requests in DynamoDB for free. As in, you can use 25 units of read capacity for free in DynamoDB. Now, same can be applied to the write capacity as well. So if you have 10 requests for write in DynamoDB, so it gives it overhead, right? So with 10 requests for write, you're using 1 unit of write capacity, right? So with 250 requests for write, you'd be using 25 write capacity. So Theon, are we clear now with what write capacity units and read capacity units are? All right, so Theon says clear. Guys, any other question related to the non-expiring free tier? All right, everybody is giving me a go. All right, guys, so let's move ahead. So now we have learned about all the free tiers and the non-expiring free tier, right? Let's now move ahead and perform a demo. So let's look at what we are going to do. So first up, I'll teach you guys how to create an AWS account. So if you'll be creating an AWS account, obviously you'll have the free tier activated in it. And then we will launch EC2 instances using that free tier account. In these EC2 instances, we'll be launching two kind of operating systems. We'll be launching a Windows operating system and we'll be launching an Ubuntu operating system. Why the two? Because the way you connect to the EC2 instances in the case of these two operating systems, the way of connecting is different. So you should know both the ways, and hence we are going to launch both these instances. So guys, are you excited to launch your first instance in AWS? Are we clear with what we are going to do in the demo now? All right, so Drew says yay. All right, Drew, I like your excitement. Let's move ahead and start with the demo. So first up, we'll go to the aws.amazon.com website. You'll click on create an AWS account. Now you'll click on I am a new user, enter your email ID here and click on sign in using a secure server. Now I've already done these steps for you guys for your convenience and I've taken screenshots. Let's go to the screenshots and it'll be better explained over there. So like I said, you'll be first going to the create an AWS account. Next up, you will click on I am a new user and you will enter your email ID here and you will click on I'm using a secure server later. Then you will come on the screen, you will enter your name, your email address, type it again, enter the new password and then type it again and then click on create account. Once you're done with that, you'll be asked for your contact information. I've hidden the contact information because I don't want you guys to stalk me. And then I'll tick this sign and click on create account and continue. Once you're done with that, you would be asked for your card details. You can enter your card details and click on verify card and continue. Again, I've hidden the details. You would understand why. Next up, you would be asked to verify your phone number, right? In the first step, you enter your phone number and then you click on call me now. Once the call is in progress, you will be told code to enter. You'll enter that code and you'll be done with step 2. In the step 3, you can continue to select your support plan. Now these are the plans that you'll be given the option for. You have to choose the basic plan because you guys will be practicing on AWS, right? You're not a business, you're not a developer, you're actually practicing AWS. So you'll click on the basic plan and click on continue. And that is it guys, you have successfully created your AWS account. You can click on the sign into the console button and enter your email and password and then come on to your AWS account. So once you are in your AWS account, let me show you how it will look. So you'll click on sign into console. Enter your password. And here you don't have to select I am a new user. You have to select I am a returning user and my password is whatever your password is, right? So you click on sign in using a secure server. Now this is the AWS dashboard. You can see all the services which are there in AWS on this page. Since we are going to launch an EC2 instance, we'll click on EC2 under the compute domain. Alright guys, so this is the EC2 dashboard. So you can see I have 2 running instances as of now, but since I have to launch a new instance, I'll click on launch instance. Now these are all the options that I've been given. So I have to choose, since I have to launch an Ubuntu server and a Windows server. So Windows server takes more time to get set up. So let's launch a Windows server first. So over here guys, I told you you have to be very careful, right? You have to select the t2.micro instance because this is the instance which is available in the free tier. All right, so you'll be selecting the t2.micro instance and then shall click on next. Next up, we will be asked to fill these details. So mostly all the details are filled by default. You don't have to touch anything because you have not learned all about these things. And don't worry, you will learn about these things when we come down to the EC2 module. For now, this doesn't have to do with all your learning. You just have to see how you can launch your first instance, right? So don't touch anything here. Let it be and then click on next. Then you'll be prompted to add storage. So a minimum number of GBs will be mentioned here. So a Windows instance takes about a 30 GB minimum, so it has given that number. You can increase it if you want, but we won't be increasing because it's a demo instance, right? So let's click on next. Now you'll be asked to enter a value. So this value is basically the name that will be reflected in your EC2 dashboard, right? So you have to differentiate your instance with the other instances, right? So we will enter a name so that we can recognize this is a Windows instance. So let's give it the name Windows Demo, right? Let's now click on next. So let me launch a new security group because you guys will also be creating a new security group because it will be your new account. So let it be at the default value and click on review and launch. Alright, now this page helps you review whatever information that you have provided. So everything looks fine to me. You guys don't have to sweat. Just click on launch and you'll be prompted with this screen. So now you have to choose or create a key pair. Now what is a key pair? Key pair is basically a way for you to get authenticated to the AWS servers, right? So if you have a Windows instance running or you have an Ubuntu instance running, you will be provided with a private key and the public key will be kept with the AWS infrastructure. Now whenever you will try to connect with your Ubuntu server or your Windows server, you will be asked to present your private key. Once you present your private key, it will be matched against the public key, and if it matches, you will be authenticated. Now in no case you should be losing your private key, guys. If you lose your private key, you lose access to your instance. So it is imperative that you keep it safe somewhere and it is properly backed up, in the sense that there are enough replicas with you so that if one computer crashes, you always have a copy to keep it to connect to your instance, right? So now we'll be creating a new key pair because you guys are doing it for the first time. Let me show you how to do that. The name should be unique, guys. The name is AWS demo for the key pair, and let's click, and after that you have to download the key pair. So you have got the private file now. It has the PEM extension. So this key pair is called AWS demo. So you have downloaded it and the launch instance button is now active. So we'll click on launch instances. So my instances are now being launched. It will take a while. Let's go back to the EC2 dashboard. Let me show you something over there. So we go to EC2. So when we entered, we had 2 running instances, but now we have 3 running instances because we have just launched a Windows server as well, right? Let's now create an Ubuntu instance because it will take time for a Windows instance to be ready. So let's create our Ubuntu instance. So first of all, you'll click on launch instance. You'll select the Ubuntu operating system. You have to select the t2.micro. Remember guys, don't select anything else, otherwise you'll be charged. Click on next. Like I said, don't sweat about anything. Click on next. So if you would have noticed, Windows servers were occupying 30 GB of minimum space, but with Ubuntu it's occupying only 8 GB, right? So it's a plus. Let's click on next. Now you would have to give a name to your instance. Let's give it Ubuntu demo. Same step guys, nothing is different in any operating system that you're launching in EC2. Let's click on next. Let's create a new security group again. It is okay, review and launch. And then you can review all the details that you have entered. Let's click on launch, and there's no need of creating a new key pair again. You can choose the key pair that is just created, which was AWS demo, remember. So let's select AWS demo. You have to acknowledge that you have access to it and click on launch instances. So your instance is now being launched. It will take some while, but be patient. It will all happen in a jiffy. So let's go back to our EC2 dashboard and see our instances. So now you have 4 running instances since I've launched an Ubuntu instance as well. So let's click on the running instances and it will give you a list of all the instances running. Our instance is Windows demo and Ubuntu demo. So you can check the status over here. It's still in the initialization phase. So let's give it more time. Meanwhile, I'll tell you some properties which are attached to Windows and Ubuntu. So when you click on your instance, you can see all the details which are there attached to that instance. So you have the public IP address. So you'll be connecting to your instance using this IP address, right? So this IP address has to be kept handy. And then you can see that your instance type is t2.micro. You can check your VPC ID or the subnet ID. So everything is mentioned here. Whatever you have configured, you can see the configuration over here. All right. Same is the case with Ubuntu instance as well. This is the public IP for Ubuntu instance and the other information. Since it's taking more time, let me explain you how will you connect to a Windows instance first. So for connecting to the Windows instance, you have to make a remote desktop connection. When you launch a remote desktop connection, you'll be asked for the IP address. So just copy the IP address from the place which I just showed you, copy it and paste it over there and click on connect, right? Once you do that, it'll ask you for a username and password. So by default, the Windows instances that you launch in your AWS infrastructure will have the username administrator, and the password you can decrypt by using your public key which you have downloaded, which we'll be doing in a little while, right? But if you're connecting to an Ubuntu instance, since it's a command line operating system, you have to create an SSH connection using Putty, which is a software, right? So you'll be downloading Putty and Putty Gen. So in Putty, you cannot use the PEM file extension, which is there for your private file. So you first have to convert this PEM file extension into PPK. So that can be done using the Putty Gen software. So I will teach you guys how to do that. You will load this file in the Putty Gen and save the private file in the PPK format in the same place that you have stored your PEM file, right? Once you do that, now you will be using the Putty software. In the Putty software, you will be uploading your private file and you will be feeding in the IP address that you want to connect to. Once you connect it to the terminal, you have to enter the user. Now, any user that you create, any operating Ubuntu instance that you create on AWS will have a default user called Ubuntu. So you enter Ubuntu and you'll get connected to your Ubuntu instance and you can use it as if it was your own Ubuntu machine. So these are the ways you get connected to your operating system in case of Windows and Ubuntu. Okay, it shows that our instances are ready now. So let's connect to our Windows instance first. So you'll click on Windows instance, click on Actions, click on Connect, click on Get Password, and now you have to upload your private file, right? So you'll choose File, go to Downloads, select the PEM file that you have downloaded. It's here. Click on Open, click on Decrypt Password. So here is a password and here is a username. Copy the password to your notepad. Alright, I've copied the password. Now I'll copy the IP address. So copy the IP address from here. Go to remote desktop connection. Enter the IP address here. Click on connect. Now you have to enter the administrator as the username and the password would be what you have stored in your notepad. Right, click on password and paste it and then click on OK. So if you have entered everything correctly, you will see the screen Your server is now initializing. So guys, you can now use this server as if it was your own machine, right? So you will be prompted with the desktop, with this taskbar and everything. Now you can install anything that you want on this machine. Like I said, EC2 is just like a raw server. Now you can install any software on this system. You can configure the firewalls to do anything, and that is it. Alright guys, so this was EC2 Windows instance. Let's now connect to our Ubuntu instance. Alright, so we have our Ubuntu instance ready as well. So like I said, for connecting to the Ubuntu instance, you have different options. If you go back to, if you want to try, let's click on Actions, click on Connect. So here you don't have that option for getting the password, right? It is explaining you the putty gen way of connecting. So let me show you guys how to do that. So first of all, you have to convert this PEM file to your PPK file, right? Because we entered the same key pair for our Ubuntu instance as well, right? So let's copy this PEM file to our desktop first. So let's launch our putty gen software. This is my putty gen software. Click on run. I will load my private key over here. So it's in downloads and you have to select all files. Since it's of PEM extension, you'll select the file, click on open. So it will say successfully imported foreign key, right? Click on OK and then click on save private key. So it'll ask you, are you sure you want to save this key without a passphrase to protect it? Or say yes, and then save the file in downloads again. So let's name it as AWS demo only. Since it's different extension, it can be saved in the same name. So let's click on save now. So my PPK file is now been, my PEM file has now been converted to PPK. Let's launch the putty software now. You'll be entering your IP address over here for that Ubuntu instance. So let's copy our Ubuntu instance IP address, paste it here. And now for your authentication or your private file, you'll click on SSH, click on authentication, and then you have to browse to your private key file. So click on browse, click on downloads because this is where my PPK file is, click on open, and this is it. Now when you click on open, it will connect to your IP address using this PPK file. Let's do that. So ignore this warning, just click on yes. So it's asking me login as, so enter Ubuntu. Like I told you guys, this is the default user for any Ubuntu instance that you launch in AWS. Hit enter. And that's it guys, you are successfully connected to your Ubuntu instance. This is your terminal. Now you can use this terminal as if you were using your own Ubuntu machine. So this is how you connect to an Ubuntu server on AWS infrastructure, right? So let's close this connection now. Go back to our presentation. So guys, we saw how we can connect to our Windows instance and our Ubuntu instance, and we also saw how you can create your own AWS account. So any questions that you have, I can repeat any part that you want. Any question guys? All right, John says all clear. Dhruv says no questions. Parvati says all well. All right guys, if you have no questions, so let's move on to the next section, which is careers in AWS. So in this section, we'll be discussing about the AWS certifications. So let's see what all certifications are offered by AWS. So AWS offers the certifications at two levels. First level is the associate level, and the next level is the professional level. So at the associate level, you have three kind of certifications. The first one is AWS Certified Solutions Architect. You have AWS Certified Developer. You have AWS Certified SysOps Administrator, right? At the professional level, you have AWS Certified Solutions Architect. You have AWS Certified DevOps Engineer. Now, if you want to become an AWS Certified DevOps Engineer, you have to have an associate level AWS Certified Developer or an associate level AWS Certified SysOps Administrator. But if you want to become an AWS Certified Solutions Architect, you should have a prior certification of Associate AWS Certified Solutions Architect. All right. So guys, this is basically the kind of certifications that you have, and for the professional level, these are the prerequisites. Are we clear with the certifications and the prerequisites? All right. Dhruv says all clear. John says all clear. Parvati says no questions. All right guys, so let's move ahead. Okay, Theon is asking me, can you explain in detail about these certifications? Exactly, Theon, that is what my next slide is all about. So let's move on to my next slide now. So at the associate level, like I said, there are three kind of certifications. You have AWS Solution Architect, you have AWS Developer, and you have AWS SOPs. So let's understand the difference among these three certifications. The job of a solution architect is to design and deploy highly available, fault-tolerant, and cost-efficient systems on AWS infrastructure, right? So your job would be to create such architectures which are fault tolerant, which are highly available and are cost efficient at the same time, right? As a solution architect, for this you should have a core understanding of all the AWS services. If you feel a use case should come to you, an exact roadmap come to your mind of as in what AWS services should be used, and if there's a use case, as in if there's a particular problem, say suppose you have to choose between EC2 and Elastic Beanstalk, right? If you have a PHP web application and you have to choose between EC2 and Elastic Beanstalk, you would always go for Elastic Beanstalk, given that your instance should be running only one website at that time, right? So if that is the use case, you would go for Elastic Beanstalk. But if there is some other environment which is not PHP, or which is an environment which is not covered by Elastic Beanstalk, you would know you have to use EC2. In no case you would go for Lambda, because Lambda is not used for hosting an application. It is used for executing background tasks. This kind of clarity if you have in your mind, the solution architect job is going to be more easy for you. So you have to have core understanding. When I say more easy for you, you'll actually not reach there until and unless each and every concept is clear to you. And don't worry guys, with the kind of training sessions that we have planned for you, if you go along with me, you will definitely crack the AWS exam for sure. So just keep your assignments ready in every session and keep up with the hands-on demos that we are doing. Keep on practicing them on your own and you will be set. All right. So this was the job of solution architect, that you have to create architectures which are fault tolerant, which are highly available and are cost efficient at the same time. Next up, we have the role of AWS developer. So for the job of AWS developer is to develop applications on this architecture. All right. So using this infrastructure which your solution architect has created, you have to create and maintain applications, right? So this is what AWS developer is all about. Next up, we have the AWS SysOps associate. So AWS SysOps associate is a guy who is basically a system administrator. He is responsible for provisioning, operating, and maintaining highly available systems on the infrastructure that you have created. So the infrastructure that the solution architect creates, right, and the applications that the AWS developer has created. Now the job of a SysOps associate is to maintain these applications and handle them on this infrastructure. So like I said, his job is more of a system administrator, and that is what AWS SysOps associate is all about. So guys, any doubts between any of the three roles that we just discussed? Let me recap. So a solution architect would create an architecture, the developer would create the applications on that architecture, and the SysOps guy would maintain and operate those applications on that infrastructure again, right? So this is how the cycle goes, and this is the difference between an AWS solution architect, an AWS developer, and an AWS SysOps associate. So guys, any difference and any question, any of these roles that we just discussed? All right, John says all clear. Dhruv says no questions. Parvati says all clear. Theon is clear as well. Okay guys, any question that you get between any part of my explanation, please pop up the question. I shall be happy to explain it to you. All right, let's move on to our professional certifications now. So the professional certifications are two. One is the AWS Solutions Architect Professional and one is the AWS DevOps Engineer Professional. Like I said, if you want to become an AWS Solution Architect Professional, you have to have an AWS Solution Architect Associate certification first, right? Then only you can go and apply for an AWS Solution Architect Professional exam. Now this role is the pinnacle of all AWS certifications. With Solution Architect Professional, you move to the next level of solution architects, okay? You are now more experienced and hence you can handle more complex architectures and hence you become a professional. So if you are in a company, you'll be managing the associate solution architects, and since you are the professional, you'll be the one who will be managing them. you'll be the manager of those solution architects. So it's basically like a promotion to the next level, right? So this is what AWS Solution Architect Professional is all about. Let's move on to the next role, that is AWS DevOps Engineer Professional. So let's talk about AWS DevOps Engineer. So DevOps is a relatively new term in the software development industry, right? It's a culture which is being picked up and is very fast in the development world. You can relate it to agile development, but if we start discussing DevOps, it would totally take us in the wrong direction. We won't want to do that. So therefore, we will discuss about AWS DevOps Engineer in our next session, which is all about AWS certifications. I will explain to you what each role does and what DevOps Engineer role is. But the prerequisites of DevOps are pretty clear, which I explained to you. So for becoming an AWS DevOps Engineer, you should either be a SysOps Associate certification holder or an AWS Developer certification holder. Then only you will be able to write the exam for DevOps Engineer. So guys, any questions in the professional certifications apart from AWS DevOps Engineer, which we are going to discuss in our next session? Now John is asking me, didn't we apply for Solution Architect? Yes, John, you did, but it's always good to know what all other certifications are out there and what next level it is for you, right? You have applied for Solutions Architect Associate certification. The next level for you is a Solution Architect Professional. So you should know what your career path is going to be in the next 2 or 3 years. And that is the reason we have explained these certifications for you. And it's always good to know about all the certifications that AWS has to offer, so that if you change your mind about maybe your career path tomorrow, you would know what to go for, right? Any more questions, guys? All right, so Dhruv says no questions. John says all well. Theon says no question. Parvati says all set. All right, guys, so let's move ahead. So like John pointed out, you guys are here for the solution architect role. So let's discuss in detail about the solution architect role now, right? So as a solution architect, these will be your responsibilities. These are the roles and responsibilities that you'll be carrying out every day. So your job will be to create highly available and scalable systems. So when I say highly available, your application should be available at all times of the day. You should architect in such a way, or your environment should be architected in such a way that your application gets all the resources to be available at all the time, right? Next up, your job will be to implement and deploy in AWS. So you will be deploying services, you'll be implementing architectures, right? So you are responsible for that as well. Now, next up, you should be able to make a decision and select the right AWS service according to the use case or according to the requirement which comes up to you. And that can only be achieved if you are clear with your concept on all the AWS services. So like I said, you have to be clear with each and every service that we are going to cover in our training session. I will make sure that each and every service is clear, and also I will hand out to you assignments so that you can evaluate yourself as well, right? And don't forget the hands-on part, guys. I'm repeating again and again, hands-on is very important because that is the way you learn. Let's move on to the next role, which is disaster recovery techniques. So next up is you should be proficient with all the disaster recovery techniques. So there could be an earthquake, there could be a power failure, right? So you should be able to make decisions in times like these, or you should have a system ready for times like these, so that if a system fails because of any disaster occurrence, your system should be able to fail over to the backup system that you have set up, right? So as a solution architect, it is your job to set up those backup systems, right? The fifth role is to make use of all AWS architectural best practices. Now, AWS architectural best practices are published on the AWS website, right? Best practices have actually been provided by AWS, keeping in mind how they have made their environment or how they have made their infrastructure, right? So if you follow these best practices, these have also come out of the experience that AWS solution architects have put in, right? So since AWS exists since 2006, so solutions architects have also been around since the same time. So with their experience, they've learned a lot of things and they have come up with best practices that you guys should follow. Since you guys are newbies, when we talk about solution architects or architecting a solution, you should always follow the best practices without asking any questions. All right, guys, so these are the roles and responsibilities of a solution architect. Are we clear with each and every role over here? Any questions so far? Anything you want me to repeat? Anything you didn't understand, guys? All right, guys, you guys are giving me a go. All right, let's move ahead then. Next up, let's discuss about the jobs, because ultimately you are doing this certification to get a job as a solution architect, right? So let's look at the jobs. So in 2012, you can see the graph, and after that, the growth has been exponential, right? Since 2012 to 2016 and still going on, the growth has been increasing. The demand has been increasing for solution architect, and I can tell from my experience as well that it will be increasing furthermore, because the demand for cloud computing is increasing at a rate that you cannot imagine right now, because every company today is making a move to the cloud. Because obviously if you're starting a startup, you have less risks, you have everything in the cloud because you don't have to buy anything, right? Keeping that in mind, every new company which is coming up today is trying to make a move to the cloud. And because of this, the cloud industry is increasing, the cloud industry is expanding, and since AWS holds a major chunk in the cloud computing market share, AWS is bound to grow again, right? And if AWS grows, the requirement for solution architect also grows, right? So it's good for you guys as well. So this graph is going to go up in the future as well. So guys, any questions so far regarding the solution architect role? Everybody seems happy to look at the graph. Okay guys, let's move ahead. So our next section is about AWS competitors. So you guys know the cloud computing industry is very big, right? So it is bound to have a lot of competition. So AWS also has a lot of competition. So these are the competitors which are competing with AWS. You have Rackspace, you have DigitalOcean, you have Joint, you have Microsoft Azure, you have Google Cloud Platform, VMware, IBM Cloud, right? So these are all the competitors are closely aligned with AWS success path. Now, the AWS would be very modest if they say they are closely aligned with their growth, because AWS is leading by a very large number. What number? Let's look at that. So let's look at the market demand for AWS. If we talk about the global cloud computing market share, so AWS alone has a share of 31% compared to its other cloud providers, which is 69%, which now will you say that 69% is greater than 31%? What's the big deal? But you have to understand that AWS alone has a share of 31% of market share. No other cloud provider is even near to what AWS market share is right now. And that is the reason that AWS is still a leader, right? Let's talk about server capacity. This number will blow your mind. All of its competitors combined, let's imagine they have a server capacity of X. AWS alone has a server capacity of 6X, which is 6 times the server capacity of all of its competitors combined. Guys, this is a huge number. Right? Imagine yourself as a client. You have a very successful application that you have been hosting on your own private data centers. Now you know that your application is successful, and you know that your application will be more successful in the coming years, right? If you were to make a move to the cloud, which cloud provider will you choose? Wouldn't you choose AWS, which has 6 times the server capacity of all its competitors combined? Your application can easily grow on that kind of infrastructure. So it would be a safe bet to make a move on AWS, and that is the reason that people still believe in AWS and why AWS is still a leader in the market. But these are all current statistics. This doesn't mean that the times will not change. Maybe 4 years or 5 years down the line, Azure will also come up at par with AWS. But if we see the current scene, AWS is the cloud provider right now. There is no one who can touch AWS, and that is the reason that we are talking about AWS today. That is the reason I'm teaching you guys about AWS, and that is the reason that you guys want to become solution architects for AWS. So guys, any doubt regarding why are we learning AWS today, or why you guys chose to become solution architects? I mean, although it's too late, but then if you had doubts, are we clear with the doubts now? All right, Dhruv says no doubt. John says all clear. Parvati says thank you. You're welcome, Parvati. All right. Okay guys, so this brings us to the end of our session. Let's recap what all we did today. So we learned what is AWS, and then we saw the different domains which are there in AWS. Then we discussed the AWS certifications followed by the AWS Free Tier. And then we also saw a demo where we launched an Ubuntu instance and a Microsoft Windows instance as well. Then we took a look at AWS competitors. We saw all the competitors and we saw how AWS is leading them. Right? So guys, any doubt in any of this part, I can explain it again. No issues. Anything you didn't understand throughout the session. Right? John says everything is clear. Thank you. You're welcome, John. Parvati says all well. All right, guys, if you don't have any other questions, shall we wrap up this session? All right, guys. So thank you for attending this session today. I hope you guys learned something new. I'll be handing out the assignments in your LMS. Please complete your assignments and come back in the session. Please practice the hands-on part. Again, I'm telling you guys, it's very important that you practice the hands-on. If you have any problems, you can always contact our support team. They are available for you 24/7. So thank you guys for attending today's session. See you in the next session. Have a good day.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!